Welcome back to the Entertainment Room, where a random guy unloads all his random movie opinions on hopefully somebody who gives a shit. And today, I have for my second week in a row some quick film reviews of films I watched this week. And now I call it my second week, but with scheduling stuff and the holidays, I'm combining last week and part of this week of Thanksgiving, so shit's a bit weird, but life goes on. The dates are November 18th through the 27th, as far as the range of dates of films I watched. And if you didn't listen to the previous week, I will run through each film spoiler free, then I will discuss them again with some spoilers if there are any that I want to go into. So, I want to try and do this weekly to get more reviews out there, so follow for more. And today's films include Shredder, Strays, Face Off, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and Christmas Evil. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first film we have on this list is a 2003 horror film taking place at a closed down ski resort, and that film is Shredder. It follows a serial killer stalking and preying on some dipshit young adults who break in and try and have a weekend of skiing, shredding, as they call it about 700 times, and smashing, the three S's. Two of those may be the same thing, but I don't know shit about winter sports, so sorry. But I saw this trailer for the first time years ago, and every time I come across it online, I want to watch it because it just seemed interesting. I love the snowy mountain setting. An abandoned desolate resort, it's a fantastic idea, a fantastic atmosphere. Just unfortunately, they decided to take that and make a B-horror comedy with not enough going for it to deserve such an opportunity. And now don't get me wrong, I don't hate this movie. I don't necessarily like it either, but I won't lie and say I was not entertained in places. Now when it comes to B-horror films, I enjoy them. Slashers are fun. Dumb ones that are intentionally goofy more than anything can and have worked for me. And I'm not a stuck-up serious critic with a girthy stick up his ass, but I want them to at least have fun with the premise and take full advantage of it, or at least come close to it. So let's just start off with the kills. The body count is decent, I think slightly in the double digits, so that's fine. And a few gore effects are okay. None are that great, but for an early 2000s low-budget horror slasher, they're not complete shit either. And just nothing crazy or super notable. It's not scary at all either, or even really suspenseful, but I did not expect it to be. Would it have been nice to at least have some of that? Sure, but what are you gonna do? Cracked Paint, though, has more intelligence and personality than these characters, which, again, can be fine for the humor. Over the top acting can be funny and entertaining, but to me, when it comes to these self aware movies, I do feel at least a few of the characters need to be likable, or at least funny, to some extent, so we're not just toughing it out sitting through watching a bunch of irritating assholes for an hour and a half, but they just rarely give us that. And there are a couple instances where someone will have, like an amusingly tone-deaf comedic timing, like a comedic joke, that just feels way out of place, where they find a body of someone, and they will just casually insert a stupid joke or a pun, while apparently panicking, so a couple of those moments kind of made me chuckle, I guess. There's also another death that I'll get into in the spoilers section that the camera just keeps panning back to, and it's because the positioning of the character is dark, absolutely, but just the situation and the place of the death just made it kind of funny in a way. And you can see them pop up in the background of a couple just unaware characters, and I just almost laughed out loud in the middle of a workday. So I guess it's fine. I'm probably going to hell anyway, whether it's meant to be that funny or not, so be it. And then the killer's MO is also just goofy as shit, but I kind of enjoyed how dumb it was personally. And then the reveal at the end was okay. I kind of saw it coming, even though I'm usually bad at that kind of stuff, but it's not necessarily a bad reveal either. So, Shredder offers occasional glimmers of promise, but still falls pretty flat, and you'll be left hoping, it was better, especially for the opportunity they had with the premise and the setting. So, I would like to see a better film with a similar idea, but for this project, I'll give it maybe a 4.3 out of 10. So next is a film that was surprisingly more effective than I expected, and that is the 2023 film Strays. This is a live-action R-rated film following talking dogs, And I was originally excited by this idea, as I was surprised it wasn't written and released much sooner, a similar idea to this, but I only saw mixed reviews of the film and not too much conversation going on about it, but I finally got around to it. And the story follows Reggie, voiced by Will Ferrell. He is dumped by his owner in an alley, basically becoming a stray, and Bug, played by Jamie Foxx, tries to show him the ropes. Enjoying them after a while is Hunter and Maggie, portrayed by Randall Park and Isla Fisher. So, with a rated R movie about dogs, I was expecting raunchy and a lot of R rated language, and you do get that. And what worried me was that there would only be raunchy and the word fuck a bunch of times, but without any jokes. Kind of like a Happy Time Murders situation if you've seen that film with that setup, but in that case it was R rated Muppets instead. And I hated that movie. But when it comes to Strays, I actually kind of like this one. And while I went into this movie with an open mind, I did not expect to fully commit to saying that. And there are some gags and dialogue that do go on for a bit too long, to where it just gets weird. Yeah, some moments, but my fear did not come true, to where that was all this movie had to offer. And I laughed pretty often. The jokes were mainly pretty stupid. It's a lot of juvenile humor. My humor is pretty broken anyway, and I'm kind of an idiot at heart when it comes to comedy, but I can see a lot of people being surprised by how effective this film can be. And we see the world and viewpoints of the world through dogs mostly, and it was generally entertaining to see them come up with their own theories about why us humans do some of the things that we do. And honestly, many things are pretty wholesome in a way, with the innocence of most dogs, especially those who are used to being with a responsible and respectful owner. And also, I think that casting makes this film with some of the jokes and line deliveries. Will Ferrell has this really innocent delivery for Reggie that makes some of the simple things he says funnier. Plus, his character is just so loyal, and he doesn't always realize when he's being insulted, which also makes some heartfelt and heart-wrenching moments as well, which again I will get to. And Randall Park as the gentle giant Great Dane, as Hunter, was perfect with his nerdier voice and line delivery. He was one of my favorite aspects of this whole pack. Nala Fisher as the Australian Shepherd with her Aussie accent was also fantastic. Honestly, a strong female lead, but on top of that, some great humor as well. And that does bring me to what will be a negative for a lot of people, and that may be Jamie Foxx's character, Bug. Now, I like this character as a whole. He fits in well to the story and has a great arc in the end with some effective jokes, but he cusses a lot. And if you knew me personally, you would know how hilarious it is that I would even mention that, as I've been trying for years to work on some of my language or how much I use it. But the word fuck in particular is used a lot in this film, but most notably with his character. And a lot of the negative reviews that I think there is does come from the pervasive language throughout, but Bug's character does it the most, and especially in the beginning, it was especially constant. And now that stuff doesn't bother me too much for a long while, doesn't really bother me. It's just something worth pointing out, I think. And they really ran with the gag of having dogs swearing, but thankfully in this case to me, there's plenty of likable humor mixed in, just enough to help me look past it. And if you want to be realistic, he is a street dog, the street dog of the group who has these complicated emotions and a traumatic past that come to light later. So people who are that miserable or just used to being out in a tough environment just trying to survive typically swear more often, so you could kind of say it makes sense for his character, no matter how annoying it might be from us just sitting down watching a movie on our couches. I'm just going to leave that there, but moving on. This movie also has some emotional moments. Abandonment is a big theme, and, viewpoints on love and loyalty, toxic relationships, and I think it is handled pretty well. It even consistently works in subtle comedy that largely works, but you still understand that the life of many dogs is a very sad one, and to no fault of their own in most cases. And I think toxic relationships between dogs and humans, once again, was a theme that was explored much more effectively than I expected. So overall, Strays offered me a much better time than I would have ever guessed. The humor does work for me, but that doesn't mean it will work for you. It is incredibly immature, and the story, despite being formulaic, is entertaining still. The characters have fantastic chemistry, and while the raunchier bits can linger a bit too long in places, it's handled much better than other comedies similar to this that are just trying to be edgy. Not all of it, but I was rarely annoyed personally. And I'll go into some things in spoilers later, but for now, I'll leave you with a quick bit of advice for if you should watch this movie or not. And that is simply a quote from a review on IMDb that just kind of sums up the experience really well. And just to be clear, I checked out reviews just to see what people said, to see what they didn't like about it. I know that I can separate my opinion from theirs. I just get really curious why people, trash certain movies, especially comedies, so that's where my mind was going with that. So I just checked out to see what some people said, what they didn't like about it. And it's basically what I thought and kind of already touched on here. So this mostly positive review for this film that I saw said, Strays is very adult for the immature at heart. Simple, but it really does capture the essence of this movie, and if you will like it or not. So, this movie is included with a Prime membership, if you want to check it out. My rating, 7.5 out of 10. Okay, so next film, this was my first time watching the 1997 classic Face Off, and I didn't realize until this week, when I got ready to watch it, that John Woo was the director, and that really got me intrigued because I feel like this was just the holy trinity of an enthralling 90s cheesy-ass action film. That triad containing John Woo, John Travolta, and Nicolas Cage bringing us the most over-the-top, bombastic action, directing, acting. I was actually kind of thrilled to go into this. Now, John Woo is an odd character. While I consider Mission Impossible 2 a guilty pleasure, I still don't love what he did with it, and it was very much an outlier film in that franchise. Maybe he should have just done a standalone action film with Tom Cruise, separate from Mission Impossible, but that's beside the point. But in this case, if you're not aware, Face Off follows Sean Archer, played by John Travolta, who captures terrorist Castor Troy, who is played by Cage. And Troy is not only a terrorist, but he also killed Sean's young son, making this manhunt extra personal. Once he's captured and in a coma, they need information on a bomb that is supposedly going off soon, so they organize a face transplant so Sean can go undercover as Troy to get that information. But unfortunately, Castor Troy wakes up from his coma and makes the doctor give him Sean's face, which means they are now assuming each other's identity. And now, that is quite a plot, with obviously a lot of fake science going into it to obtain all of this. And as you can imagine, there are some plot holes throughout you may be able to argue for as to why some of the things worked out the way they did, but for me at least, I just enjoyed watching a dumb 90s action film with two actors who do way too much all the time on screen, and I just really had a blast with this one. At nearly 2.5 hours, I feel the story never really drags its feet. It was just a pleasure to watch the quirks of these two actors play out, especially Nicolas Cage's. But even outside of that, there were some solid emotional moments as well, and you do feel the risk associated with Sean's family after they make the face swap. And if you've seen one John Woo action movie, this is very similar to others. Explosions, slow motion, leaps, dives, running while firing multiple gun rounds from various guns, into oftentimes nothing. Did I mention explosions? But with that being said, do some of these things make you take the story slightly less serious? Maybe, but I think they inject enough peril and risk into the story to make you care for these characters, and even be outraged at some of the injustices that happen in some situations. So, some of the other side characters have nice purposes as well, and despite all the excess cheese in several moments, this just feels like a mindless, cheesy action film that I just really needed this week. An action movie that works magnificently for some rewatchability, and hopefully a future physical copy for me on my shelf. So, just embrace the 90s absurdity, and I think you'll have a great time. 7.8 out of 10. Okay, so for this next movie, I won't do spoilers for this one. I don't have much to hit on, especially for such a popular franchise, but my wife and I have seen the Harry Potter movies numerous times, and this week we watched the first one again, which is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, or Philosopher's Stone. And now the first couple of these films are a bit kiddish, but that does not mean that they are bad. Not at all. I enjoy all of these. And of course in this first one, the CGI is a bit rougher in the beginning, but that doesn't take away from how impressive this initial adventure is. It's a great introduction to our characters, the casting was spectacular, and just rewatching these, I feel are even more magical knowing where all the different characters wind up in the end, and just how they mature over time. And it has been sad to see several of the older actors pass away over the past several years, but I'm happy their legacy lives on in their careers, and I can only hope that they appreciated what they offered to this beloved franchise. And I do want to rank all these films one day, but for now, that's all I have to say, so 7 out of 10. The next film is a little 1980s Christmas horror thriller film called Christmas Evil, also known as You Better Watch Out. And it follows a guy named Harry who witnesses something that scars him when he's young, and he snaps one day in adulthood and goes on a Santa-themed killing spree. And this one isn't labeled as such, but I'm pretty certain that this was meant to be a black comedy as well, and I think it's hard not to feel that from the start. The psyche of this lead character is disturbing and creates some tension, but with some of the delivery, acting, some of the editing choices. It does also feel somewhat comedic as well. If that was not the intention, well, as I said earlier, I might be going to hell anyway, so that's just me. But I do overall like this movie. The story is interesting and kept me invested the entire time. It is a slow burn about a guy obsessed with Santa, and just encapsulating the Santa personality. And the actor playing Harry honestly does a fantastic job writing the line with these conflicting tones. And I just kept thinking throughout that Nicolas Cage would body a role like this. But that's not to discredit Brandon Maggart's performance here. And this film seems to introduce some themes with how people treat the world and the youth and all of that, and it's a fine idea, but I don't think they fully handled it in a way that stands out or hits the right tune. And the slasher elements are rather light, also, which may surprise and even disappoint many people. This is very much paced like a slow burn psychological thriller rather than a slasher, and while again I enjoyed a lot of what they did, I do feel it could have been a really solid film if it had also incorporated some of those moments, some more slasher moments. So, if you decide to watch this one, which I do recommend, just adjust your expectations before trying it. It's a little over halfway in the runtime before we get the first kill, even. But Christmas Evil was fun and an intriguing project that I'm happy I watched. I had some fun with it. I will go into some specifics and spoilers, but for now, I will leave my score at a 6 out of 10. Okay, so on to spoilers now. Make sure if you don't want anything ruined with these movies, please go watch them and come back if you want to hear some quick in-depth thoughts on them. So, we are back to the horror comedy Shredder. So, yeah, this movie is incredibly goofy. I was amused by the opener. I never thought of watching a killer chase somebody on skis, but it ended up being much more stupid looking than I ever expected. Some of the notable moments I want to mention. The first was one of the women. I didn't memorize really any names at all this time around because I just really did not care. But one girl passed by a sign on a lift warning her about loose clothing, and the foreshadowing was obvious. She gets her scarf caught on something and is hung from the lift, and the lift just continues to move, so does she. And that sight is very dark and disturbing technically, but they made sure to make it as amusing as possible. The camera literally keeps cutting back to her body about 4 or 5 different times after she officially dies, and one time she's just swinging a little bit extra aggressive in the wind and with emotions in the background. And she is seen in the background with a couple characters who are just casually eating lunch and talking to somebody on the phone. And just the absurdity really got a genuine laugh out of me. And once again, I'm sure I'll be in hell one day, but oh well. And again, there is some timing of the jokes and dialogue that's pretty funny in places. The main one that stood out to me when they find the body of a sheriff hidden inside a snowman, which is also kind of comical. But anyway, as they run around, in a panic, trying to come up with a plan, one of the women just casually calls him Frosty, the sheriff man. And now, I know, it's not funny or clever, but I think that's kind of what made it better. Now, this is the first dead body they come across. Likely a first time dead body for any of them in their entire lives. And she still finds a moment to slide such a terrible joke in amidst their panic. And I don't know, her timing, her horrible delivery, the fact that there's no cleverness whatsoever, it just really threw me for a loop and made me rewind the moment for another listen. Also, the killer is pretty goofy, again with his MO, because the apparent thing with him is that they're angry when someone breaks the rules for the resort. Back when it was open, some drunk idiots from the past, when the resort was open, just caused some deaths because they broke the rules and innocent people got hurt. So rule following was important, and it's really just a dumb fixation. But it made me laugh, especially when the killer gets on a lift with a character and just tries to shove a rule pamphlet in her face when she ignores one of the basic rules on one of the poles of the lift. So that just kind of drove the absurdity home even more. The killer didn't even kill her yet to that point. And then I also liked that the bodies were put side by side in the end, and the villain just made snow angels with all of them, so that's kind of a nice touch. And then Shelley being the killer in the end did not come as much of a surprise to me if you've seen enough of these. And she's the daughter of the man who lost his wife and other daughter to drunk skiers. And the movie definitely tries to point to him and a couple other odd locals as the killers, but she seemed off to me from the beginning in the very few moments she was on screen. And she definitely had as much motive as her dad and the other locals did. And they seem to intentionally focus on her a lot less throughout, so A bit predictable of a reveal, but not bad. So those are some moments that stood out to me in this film. It's only a couple really, because the rest plays out mostly like a bland slasher with bad acting, and too slow pacing, often lingering on certain scenes, probably to stretch the runtime as close to 90 minutes as possible, so yeah, that's Shredder. Moving on. And now back to talking about the film Strays. I do like this movie as a whole. Again, it is formulaic and really stupid, but it's entertaining and has heartfelt moments that work without divulging into overly cheesy territory. And then that opening scene with Reggie and his owner Doug, played by Will Forte, was equal parts comical, but also really heart wrenching, and really more so heart wrenching in a way, come to think of it. Because we get Reggie's perspective where he's super happy and just thinks that Doug loves him and all his dog antics, as a lot of dogs have this unwavering loyalty to their owners despite the poor treatment a lot of them receive. And we get that while seeing Doug for what he is, a hateful piece of fucking shit. That's what Doug is. And throughout, Reggie recounts some of his treatments and so-called games him and Doug used to play. He also mentions names he used to be called by Doug, such as shitbag, and he thinks this is all in the name of affection and love, until the other dogs call him out on it, and he realizes in the end that Doug was a huge problem and was the problem in their relationship, not him. I just love how it all came full circle in the end, with Reggie choosing to stay a stray and help the other stray survive on the streets. Because, especially in the end, almost made a man tear up, honestly, when you see this little chihuahua who was just recently dumped in an alley. Reggie asked him what his name is, and he replied that his name was Shitstain. And he says this so casually, and Reggie just instantly corrected him and said, "No, no, that's not your name. Like, we'll get you a better name. Like, don't worry about it." And I just thought that was a really cool moment, a nice full circle. Reggie trying to help out all the other dogs. So, anyway, to move on, some of the raunchier scenes could have been cut down or cut out. For instance, no matter how quick this shot was, I did not need to see three squirrels having a fucking threesome. It was quick, but still could have done without it. And also, some of the humping, especially of the yard statues at one point, was a bit prolonged. Although, in that one scene, I did laugh when Bug told Reggie to make a garden gnome call him daddy or some shit. And Reggie, or Will Ferrell, has this incredibly innocent sounding dog voice, just this really soft tone. Instead of saying in a sexual way, getting the gnome to call him daddy, he says, "Hi gnome, I am your father." And it's just so goddamn fucked up, but that delivery is immaculate. But still, once again, the film maybe should have kept only half the jokes about genitals, especially the joke with Hunter trying to reach a set of keys while locked up at animal control with his, doghood, but can't change the past. And then the final showdown with Doug was also satisfying. Four dogs just beating his ass. It also came with a use for Miley Cyrus's song Wrecking Ball that I never would have expected. But it was a great use for the song, to be honest with you. And I won't go into every single scene I liked, obviously, but the last thing I'll mention, just because it is stuck in my head, is whenever the dogs found a reason to howl, they would all do it, except for the Great Dane Hunter, who didn't quite have the concept down. So instead of laying out an authentic howl, he just draws out the word howling. And as a dog owner with a lab mix who has the oddest howl in the world, I just love those moments with that character. But I guess that's pretty much it. My immature late 20s self found a lot of joy out of this movie and even further appreciation for dogs, so I got mostly what I needed and some. I also loved how 95% of the dogs on screen were actual dogs and they rarely used CGI. You know, aside from the talking mouths and this one scene where they fell from the tree, I'm sure. So that was really cool. But that's all for Strays. Next film. So back to Face Off. This film really did keep me going the entire time, and I feel it was satisfying in the end. The boat chase and the final fight worked just fine, and for a John Woo movie, they definitely needed to go out with a bang or two. And the cheesy, happy ending, I think, was the best payoff here. They originally considered having Sean come home as himself, and then look in the mirror revealing Troy's face still, and I'm not sure how they would have made that make sense, but I feel that would have really taken away from the journey personally, especially after 2.5 hours. I just don't think that ambiguity would have really added anything here. And the logical part of my mind also kicked in when I tried to consider how they would tackle Troy's son Adam growing up with more questions about who his dad was, why he's dead, just coping with this whole traumatic situation and upbringing, but best not to dwell on that, I guess. It's a cheesy 90s film. And I'm sure with new appreciation for life, the characters would have figured out something to tell him. And as far as plot holes, some of the ones I read don't bother me too much. Many I did not notice or just simply did not care about. The main one that did stand out to me, though, immediately as I was watching it was, why the fuck would they leave a dangerous terrorist, coma or not, face or not, alone in a facility without keeping him secure for worst case scenario? The scenario that ultimately happened. That was the dumbest shit ever, but whatever, we had to have a movie, right? And as far as the gunfights, they were ridiculous, but I liked them. I can imagine too many professionals engaging in such acrobatics, jumping around carelessly, emptying rounds at often nothing, but that's just a style in some action movies, and I can't say I hated it, so I let it go. I think for me, the danger Sean's family was in was what held the most weight, because Eve, as the wife, to me was an incredibly likable character. She was in danger overall, yes, but also literally violated without realizing it as well. Like, she had sex with her husband's body, but it was a different mind, different eyes, so yeah. And then Jamie was an annoyingly angsty teen at first, for sure, but she was just a kid traumatized by the loss of her brother. And one of my favorite moments in the whole film was when she used Troy's advice against him, because Troy was acting as Sean at this point and gave her a knife for protection. He even taught her to hit the attacker in the thigh and twist it so it enclosed properly, and she did ultimately use that tactic once, and that was on Castor Troy toward the end, so that was a pretty badass moment when she followed his advice to a T against him, so I like that. But all in all, once again, it's an exciting time that I bought into instantly despite some shoddy acting and story elements, some effects. But I think Nicolas Cage's and John Travolta's over-the-top acting style worked perfectly for the tone and the directing style. I'll absolutely give this one another watch someday. So back finally with Christmas Evil. So this film did draw me in right away with the real life Christmas song coming to life, which was I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus in the opener, with Santa or Harry's dad getting intimate with the wife, or whatever motion he was going for with her leg. I'm unsure what the seduction tactic was here, but it was apparently working, so alright. But the tone wasn't loud enough for the Jackson 5 version of the song to start playing in the background during the opening credits, but I think I personally would have appreciated it. Would it have been out of place? Yeah, but I would have laughed probably the entire opening credits, which would have been a first for me. But again, this character was effectively portrayed, some moments played for subtle laughs, but this character is still unnerving. He wants to be Santa. He has his own naughty and nice list of the kids in his neighborhood, with just these detailed logs of their activities, which is disturbing. And he's toy obsessed with his job. He works at a toy factory, which the passion for making less shitty toys was admirable, but just the way he handled everything. He will have these breakdowns while singing Christmas songs that just, this guy was unhinged. I think this movie does an okay job detailing the possible aftermath of somebody not getting the help they need when they need it. Not saying Harry is a sympathetic character because he is a murderer, but he had these disturbed signs since childhood. Now he's a full grown adult, and everybody just kind of brushed everything under the rug with him. And in adulthood, people just took advantage of him until he put a violent stop to it. So that was an interesting theme, although nothing new. So when it comes to the build up, it is slow, and we don't get that first kill until around the 50-minute mark or the 51st minute mark or so, but the transformation was shot and written pretty well. He's a mostly wholesome Santa to the kids, but it doesn't take much disrespect from adults to set him off. And also just the manipulation and control he had over the children was haunting, and they were all willing to defy their parents to protect him, especially at the end when they had no idea of his crimes, and of course, that he's not really Santa. But back to the slasher elements, this is a low budget film, and the kills they were okay. Nothing super special or new, but it was obvious they weren't the top priority. But also, it was interesting how they made him so unpredictable, because as his first kill, or first four kills rather, they were out in the open and with an audience, just feet away from the audience, and he just sped off on his sleigh, or rather sped off in his white van with a sleigh painted on the sides. That white van, you cannot tell me that shit was not played for some laughs. But anyway, I like the unpredictability of his first round of kills, because it was in a setting you would not expect. And it kind of set the tone for what he was capable of. But the ending, when we get to it, was fine. The angry mob who pulled numerous long sticks, seemingly out of their asses to chase him down, was honestly kind of comical to me. His final discussion with his brother was okay. He just had this grudge against his brother for something he said when he was 6, which is basically Santa isn't real. And he even brought it up here to him when they had their fight, revealing even more how deep into the psychosis he really is. And that brings us to the final bit, which is him swerving and driving off a bridge. We don't see him land though. He instead recites the end of "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" and flies into the sky. And honestly, I'm actually not mad at that being the final frame. Does it look goofy? Fuck yeah, it does. But I'm guessing what they were instead of going for, instead of him crashing and exploding in the van, was I feel like they were trying to show his final moments where he's still living in this delusion in his mind, thinking he's, done for the year, going to the North Pole to make more toys for next Christmas, instead of crashing and burning. And I think that was actually a nice touch instead of the typical shot of the villain's death before the credits roll. I just think seeing his perspective of it instead to his final moments was a really haunting touch to it. So that is Christmas Evil, last film of the day. So those are some more quick movie reviews for movies I watched recently. I hope these were enjoyable and not too jarring. So if you're listening, let me know how you feel about the format and the length of these reviews. I look forward to putting out more. I am on TikTok daily with more movie content, and I hope you all have a fantastic Thanksgiving, and I will see you next time on The Entertainment Room.